right, the Fireside Chat.
I was looking for it. How's everybody?
All right, we're doing good. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am recording this session and it'll be sent out to all the participants who registered today. And I would like to encourage you to forward that out to others that work in our industry. That way they can watch this as well if they were not able to join today. And today's topic, as you can see from the slide here, we're going to be talking about latest lessons learned on improving test security for state assessments during the pandemic. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'll serve as the moderator. My name is Walt Drain. I'm the Director of Education Services here at Cavion Test Security. Prior to coming to Cavion, I served as the Executive Director of Assessment and Accountability at the Mississippi Department of Education. And I also headed up our test security unit there in the state. So without further ado, I want to introduce our featured panelist who comes to us from the West Virginia Department of Education, Timothy Butcher.
So good afternoon. I'm Timothy Butcher from the Department of Education Office of Assessment. And so I appreciate you joining our call today.
All right, and next we have John Freemer, if you'll introduce yourself.
Sure. John Freemer, President of Cavion Consulting Services, one of the founders of Cavion. So that means I was there 18 years ago when we said, why don't we have a testing company? And put up all our own money. So I'm glad we were successful because it would have been kind of a shame if we weren't. I'm a psychometrician by training. Lots of experience with large places, educational testing service, and a company that's now part of Pearson. Prior to test security, I was mostly known for developing tests and testing programs, and I'm really pleased to be with you here today.
And I'll just go right ahead and jump in. I'm John Olson, independent consultant to states, the feds, various testing organizations, and Cavion. I've been in the testing business 35 years now, mostly working on state assessment programs. Previously, I worked at ETS, AIR, CCSSO, and Harcourt. I also work with Assessment Solutions Group currently. Started my own consulting business in 2006, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And I've been working with Cavion for at least 10 years now on state security activities. So hi, everybody.
All right, thank you very much, guys, for introducing yourself. Before we get started, just a few ground rules and the structure of how this is going to work. As I stated earlier in the presentation, and for those of you who have just joined, please mute and also keep your video off. That way the focus can be on the four panelists here. And the way this is going to work is like a fireside chat would be in real person and face-to-face. Unfortunately, we can't be face-to-face and we're having to do this virtual, but I think it makes this even more important, right? And it places the importance of the topic, which is lessons learned with testing during this pandemic that we're in. And we know that this affects your world and your job on a day-to-day basis. Here we are about to embark on spring testing, and what a journey it's going to be, and what a journey it's been to prepare and to get to this point. And I really feel like there's been a lot of lessons learned from those states who may have tested in the fall, or from those entities who have prepared in the fall to get to this point to be successful, right? And to have a successful administration. And we want to share those things. We want to share those with you, but we also know you as an audience have lessons learned yourselves that you can share with us as a group. And I would encourage you to do so by placing your comments in the chat as we go through our presentation today. If you agree with things, let us know. If you don't agree with things, that's fine too. Type it in there and let us know why. Let us know what your state is doing. because again, we can all benefit and from coming together and sharing our knowledge. And that's what the purpose of this presentation is. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it is being recorded, and we will share the few slides that we have. If I can get the chat notes, I'll put those out there publicly available as well. And also this recording, that way you and others can watch it. We'll hold question and answers at the end. That will allow us to get through our questions that we're going to talk about. And speaking of those topics, we're going to kick this thing off here in a few minutes with planning for spring 2021. One of our panelists has conducted a survey of states to talk about what those states are doing and how they're planning on conducting state administrations. We're going to look at response to the pandemic. What are some best practices with policies, procedures? What are some lessons learned that we can share that may be beneficial for you and your state as you get ready to administer state assessments this spring? We'll look at lessons learned. We'll look at monitoring statewide assessments during this pandemic. What does that look like? And how is it different from the past? And also, how can we maintain integrity of state assessments? Because we know that the data that we are using at the end of state assessments is going to be so important as we measure students' ability, whether it's looking at their proficiency levels, looking at their learning loss that may be due to COVID or other means. And we want integrity of that data, right? Maybe this year test security isn't a hammer. Maybe test security is a flashlight, right? Maybe it's a flashlight to illuminate appropriate data and the use of that data and separate that from any data that may be corrupted or may be conducted in a manner that we know it cannot be trustworthy. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Again, please use the chat and let's get started. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Hopefully you'll be able to see us still. And my first question, I'm going to go to John Olson. You've conducted a survey of states and you've been in constant contact with state assessment directors over the last several months. You have a good understanding about what states are doing to test during this pandemic. So the question to you is, what are states doing or what are they planning to do with their assessments in 2021?
All right, thanks, Walt. So one of my tasks with the Assessment Solutions Group is to conduct an annual survey of states on their state assessment programs. We've been doing that for 10 years now, and the vast majority of states respond. They give us data on what their plans are and what they're planning to do in regards to testing. We added a new section in the survey this year on specifically state plans in response to COVID. And what specifically they were doing in the current school year. So I'm just going to share a few of the findings from that survey. The data were released recently to states. States said that about half of their students were learning remotely. This was back in the fall after school started up. They said that one of the concerns was some of the students were missing in action. In other words, they weren't really tuning in on the remote distance learning. And so states were implementing a combination of face-to-face or in-class learning, remote learning, and hybrid approaches. And I highlight those because then they impact the plans for testing. So most states said they were planning to administer their summative assessment in the spring, although there were variations on how the summative assessment might appear, but they were planning, and if possible, to do it in person, but many states were making other plans. When asked the three biggest challenges due to COVID for this current year and foreseeable future, States said that number one was doing a test administration and doing it in an equitable way so that they would be able to assess all their kids. Second concern was on the accuracy and validity of the test scores and how to maintain that as much as possible. And the third big concern was on doing remote test administrations and how to ensure test security. 13 states actually responded and said they were planning to do remote testing, or let's say considering to do remote testing. Now, this was data collected in September, October, November. So we went back to them as recently as a few weeks ago and said, what's your latest plans? And a number of states came back and said, well, we're reconsidering remote testing. So I think it's a constantly shifting landscape here, and states are just doing the best they can. And you know, they're not in control of our classes, in-person classes being held or not, and nobody's in control of this COVID pandemic. So the plans may be changing even as we speak. So when asked about the biggest concerns about remote testing and test security, states responded that their biggest concerns were, number one, unauthorized assistance when kids are taking the test at home and somebody's helping them, be it a parent or a brother or a friend or whatever. A second concern was just students accessing unauthorized materials through other means to help them answer test questions. And then a third concern was the exposure of items and the sharing of content with others, let's just say. So I'm assuming those are all still big concerns for states right now as they're moving forward. And then finally, we asked about other supposedly non-COVID challenges that states were dealing with related to testing. And one was just uncertainty on what the feds were requiring or saying, politics ongoing, and then of course ESSA requirements and what may or may not be required in the coming year. And then state budgets was one other concern, since there's been cuts in a number of states. And they weren't sure how that would impact the testing programs, but states have made changes already in the current year. So that was my summary. There's a lot more information, but I want to keep us on time and target. So I'll go back to you, Walt, on your questions.
All right, thank you, John. And definitely, if we can revisit any of these topics as time allows in the end, we definitely want to do so, because you talked about a lot of important topics that may be of interest to our audience, especially remote testing and how to administer that with integrity this spring. So Timothy, would you like to weigh in on that question as well? What are you doing in West Virginia or planning to do with your state assessments this year? And you're on mute, Timothy.
Thank you. I made sure we would do that, and I did that. Sorry. Thanks for the reminder. So in West Virginia, we fill out John's survey, and we echo a lot of the same concerns that John mentioned. So this fall, we did go for administering our interim assessments. We offered those to our schools and districts in a remote fashion. We did work with our testing vendor, Cameron, to develop some remote testing tools, such as video and a chat feature that would be implemented in the test system. We looked at that data from that, and we had a lot of concerns about the validity of the items. So for our summative assessment, we have decided to go in a face-to-face setting to bring the kids in. We're giving our district some flexibility in how they administer that test, but we are not allowing the remote testing option for the summative assessment in spring of 2021. No, but we are, we looked at shortening our test, we looked at changing the blueprint, and we decided against that. We also would be administering that the test that we're giving SAT, our 3-3-8 assessments, our alternate assessment, and ALPA will all be face-to-face this spring. What we did take into special consideration when we talked to our districts about the face-to-face, the concerns of the local health department and making sure that they met those guidelines. So I just like to add that to the things that John mentioned.
Yeah, thank you for that, Timothy. And I want to go back to something you said just then. You checked with your health department to make sure that your plan was going to be kosher, basically, with the state guidelines. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're leaving it up to the local districts to work with their local health department to, when they administer the test, that they follow the social distancing and the guidelines that are in place in their county.
Thank you. John Freemer, over to you. Getting out of K-12 education just for a minute here, what are other testing entities doing in response to the COVID pandemic that we could mirror in K-12 education? Because we know there's a lot of industry licensure and certification groups out there testing that are experiencing these same difficulties. So again, the question is to you, what are other testing entities doing in response to the COVID pandemic?
They're doing a lot of crying, I think would be a fair description, because in many instances, a certification program depends on testing for its revenue. That's where the money to keep the program comes from. And in March, starting in March of this year, a lot of the places they had been counting on to administer their tests shut down, schools being one of them, but also the major testing sites run by Pearson VUE, Prometric, and other providers. So the revenue stream was cut down a lot. In some cases, at least for a while, it was shut off. And that was horrible for them. And if you know folks working in that area, sometimes it's good to know others are having very bad troubles too. And the most common solution was, we've got to deliver our tests remotely. Even places that within a few weeks before that event had said, no, we looked at remote administration. We can't do that. It's too complicated, security, whatever. These same people are now contacting others, including Cavion, saying, okay, we are now going to go to remote administration. We want to do it as soon as possible. We've got to get the revenue stream up. And across the board, many of them did exactly that. They had the same kinds of troubles that were alluded to by John O. and Timothy. They have a problem we don't have quite as much in K-12 of organized cheating by people making a profit by doing that. There's a lot of money to be made facilitating cheating in a major admissions testing program, not admissions, student admissions, but certification testing program. Some parts of the world, you could earn a year's salary helping one person get a passing score on a certification exam. So it's the pressures are intense. Now that so many have shifted over, I'm kind of tickled by the extreme differences in the reactions from how soon can we get back to just giving our tests in centers. We don't want to do this for any more than we have to. In some cases they have to. It's the only way to reach them. To, we really like this remote administration model. How can we move entirely to that if you can, or at least primarily to that? I haven't heard a lot of that in K-12. We're so happy for it. We figured out how to do it. We all want to do that all the time. There may be people saying that, but they don't talk to me if they are. And just one other thing I want to mention that is across many of these entities in certification testing is a recognized need for more test questions, larger item pools, the ability to turn tests over more quickly, even willing to do, there's a lot of words for it, but Cavion talks about smart items, you read about automated item generation, some way of doing testing differently that you don't have to spend a large amount of time and have so many items. That's a big trend in certification testing. Maybe that's enough for now, Walt.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. So basically what I heard was that the certification space is no different than K-12. They're grappling with some of the same issues. They've considered remote testing. They may be doing remote testing. I think the differences would be they're probably positioned a little better in the certification space than K-12 with budgets that, you know, maybe a certification entity can go out and hire a proctoring service or not really worry about the privacy or data issues that may be plaguing the K-12 world, right? Because those are real legal issues that need to be discussed. When you're paying for a certification exam, maybe that's just the expectation, but that definitely is different than what's in K-12. So thanks for that, John. I'll turn over to Timothy now. And Timothy, your question: what specifically is West Virginia doing to address security issues because of the pandemic? I think states are interested in hearing from you exactly what you guys are planning to do. So let us know.
Oh, well, that's really interesting because we have, prior to this year, we were really comfortable in what we were doing to address security. Obviously, it's always has room for improvement, but you know, we had a pretty good policy in place. We had pretty good training and had pretty good preventive measures, you know, including monitoring and our investigative measures and our matrix, how we're flag schools. So this pandemic has really made us look at that and see what do we need to change. So I think the first thing that we did was we examined our remote testing and if we wanted to go that route or not. And so we determined that that was probably the least secure thing that we could do with the, not only with the things that John mentioned, but also the technical assistance and who's going to help a kid when he can't get logged in. So we have, are we making the, going to shrink our database to, or our, not our database, but our item base, our item pool to make sure that it's smaller so we don't expose as many items. And after a lot of discussion here at the department, we decided that really that wasn't something that we wanted to do. So we then turned our focus to our policy and our procedures on a face-to-face and how's that going to change. A couple of years ago, we had pretty good methods for detecting on a fixed form test, but now we're computer adaptive. And so how can we develop those? So we have, we looked at our one district who was giving the test remotely, and we compared it to those same students' scores in the past and from the 2019 test summative assessment. And really, it was really inconclusive as to whether they were getting parent help or not. Because we had some kids improve, some kids decrease. So there's a lot of variables in there. So now we had to look at what are we going to do to, as we move away from remote testing. I think one of the things that we have done is we have learned from our past investigations, and we kind of developed we're going to spend a lot of time looking at data and see those patterns. The other thing that we're really concerned, and we may want to hit this topic later, maybe you can address this later, is how are we going to monitor? I mean, that could be a big issue for us, especially when it comes to peer review. But I think right now what we're really focusing on is preventive measures, because one of the directives we have here at the department is to really ease the burden on our schools and our districts and not pile a bunch of stuff on them because they have the social well-being of the kids, how the achievement gaps, how the learning loss that they have. And so we want to try to steer away from that, but still maintain the integrity of our assessments. So we're looking at, we're really focusing on our training, making sure that since we're going face-to-face testing, that our policies to administer the test are not going to change. We're using those same policies with the exception of, as we mentioned earlier, those social distance guidelines. We also are, we've kind of allowed smaller groups to test without accommodations. That's going to require more staff. You also have security concerns during testing and you know, some cleanliness issues that may come up. So I think that's if we can deliver the face-to-face testing, I think our policies are going to remain pretty much intact.
All right, thank you, Timothy. So just to reiterate what I heard, the importance of policies and procedures, maintaining what you already have written down as a policy and procedure, even if you're testing in an unusual situation, it may need to be edited or modified. And you clearly need to be doing that now ahead of testing going live here in a few months. So address policies and procedures, and then the importance of training. Training is key. Making sure those test administrators and proctors and boots on the ground where the tests are actually being administered, make sure they know what to do, how to do it, and how to get that ground support that they need, whether it's from the vendor or whether it's from the state. Those are things that I heard during your talk, Timothy. And I've also written down your note there about how are we going to monitor, and we'll try to address that in just a minute, because I think that is key, especially since that's a peer review requirement. I'm going to shift over to John Olson. We hadn't heard from you in a while. So John, please tell us, what are some of the latest lessons learned to help prevent cheating?
Love this topic, latest lessons learned. So there's lots of lessons I think we've learned in the last 9 months, and we continue to learn them constantly as we go along. I think a very important one is that states and assessment consortia working with states need to take a very in-depth review, evaluation of their procedures, their practices, and their policies related to testing and maintaining test security. I would call it a security audit. We've done a number of security audits with states and assessment consortia. And even just in this past year, we did a couple of them. We had to rethink the way of doing it. The way we used to do it, face-to-face, wasn't quite going to work. So John Freemer and I conducted them virtually, and guess what? We learned that they worked quite well, and I think our the organizations we worked with, they learned that it could be a good learning process too. So it was still basically the same in-depth review of security procedures and basically getting feedback and information on how to improve procedures or areas that may be deemed risky. And there's a lot of new risks that are on the plate now, especially with remote testing and other things going on. So anyway, I think that's a lesson learned, that you need to improve, increase, enhance what you're doing. It's not the same old things anymore. And you need to improve, especially in the areas of prevention and detection, to keep the integrity of your assessment going. So that's one lesson.
All right, thank you, John. Do you want to give us another lesson, or would you like for me to move on to John Freemer and maybe come back?
Let others respond, I think would be good.
All right, John Freemer, give us a lesson learned here to help prevent cheating.
I'm working on a little mnemonic: rules, tools, and pools. So that's the mnemonic for my lesson. Rules is making sure everybody knows what they're allowed to do. And I think one of the problems with remote administration is the first assumption is, oh, they don't care about security anymore. Otherwise, they wouldn't be delivering that test in my house to my machine. And you can't have that attitude be prevalent. You know, you're gonna have to deal with it, but you need to figure out how to communicate. We really do care about the rules, and you need to tell even the teachers, but certainly the test takers, what's permissible, what's not permissible, and what are the consequences. So that to me is a big thing. In the tools department, how are you going to check that things are going well? prevention things, great, but you also need detect, did things go well? Is there something that you can do, run, as a number of states are, data forensics analyses, or check the web to see if the materials got out there? Find the tools that are right for you. And for pools, I guess I'm repeating myself from before, think about what you can do to increase the rate at which you produce items, and at the same time, try to figure out how to minimize the rate at which you use them up. And a number of places are simply cutting the length of tests. Often we're more conservative than we probably need to be in how many items we think we need to give before we make any kind of decision. And if you cut down the number of items you're going to give, that cuts down on the number of items you have to develop and pre-test and get out in the world. So maybe that's enough from me, Walt.
All right, thank you, John. Timothy?
One of the things I may want to add to what John and John had both pointed out is one of the things we learned here, and we've been fortunate that we've had this over the years, is strong support from leadership, both at the state level and at the district level, with our district test coordinators and our district superintendents to keep the integrity of the test. Because as we build that coalition with our counties and people, then they're more apt to stress the importance of the integrity of the test. So I think that's building that relationship with the counties, with the schools, to understand the important things. I think that's the biggest lesson that I would relate. I think even this year, probably even more important, because John Freemer made a good point in that if your remote testing becomes, hey, security is not important anymore. And if we can have, if you have the district, you have the principal at the school emphasizing the fact that, hey, security, even though we're testing remotely, it's still very important. That I think that goes a long way to the preventive measures that John Olson mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you very much, Timothy. And while you're still talking, why don't you carry the baton forward here and tell us, what is West Virginia planning to do regarding to monitoring of statewide assessments during the pandemic? Because I think that's a key question that states on the call want to know. How are you going to be monitoring?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because we've been discussing that. So prior to this year, we've had a really good plan in place to monitor districts over the course of the year, and we contract with people to go into schools and monitor. And now all of a sudden, we're not allowed to go into schools. So now we're like, gee, how are we going to monitor these? Because it's required to monitor testing. So, and we're also instructed not to increase the burden on our schools and districts. So when we have this taking place, do we have them compile paperwork? Because when we go to monitor, we have a checklist that we look at, like every state does. I mean, you have a checklist that you go in and you look for certain things. And so now the problem becomes, do we do a desk audit? And if we do a desk audit, how are we monitoring these people? Are we working with our vendor to develop additional electronic mechanisms for monitoring testing, such as testing after hours within those guidelines? A lot of those things we had in place, but now it even becomes more important if you're offering remote testing. Now, we're not offering remote testing, but we're looking at some of the conversations we had here as far as desk monitoring, because I think that's what we're really focusing on now, along with maybe having the districts go in and check checks. But how are we going to get into that classroom to see what's really going on? Because we can collect attendance sheets, we can collect training logs, we can collect sign-in and sign-out sheets, but does that really tell us what's going on in the classroom or in the testing environment? And the answer to that is probably not. And so we are still struggling with that. I don't have the answer for that. I don't think anybody here in our office has come with a big solution for that right now. So we're still trying to figure out how to make sure to get eyes on that, to have a monitoring place, a program in place, that we can see how that test is being administered. Now, one thing we have done that we're putting in place this year, and it was just so happened to be scheduled to go into places, we've took some lessons that we learned from past investigations that we've done that has looked at what are the patterns that we've seen in the cheating episodes or the testing irregularities that we have investigated. And a lot of those come at the end. And so we have worked with our vendor to develop a mechanism that they can now run a program through the timestamps on questions answered and give us a report back. Now, unfortunately, that's not going to happen until after testing, but that is one aspect that we're adding to this year. But we are still severely struggling with how to get into that classroom and making sure that teachers aren't assessing or administering the test correctly, and let alone cheating, but just are our policies in effect? Are they reading the directions correctly? Is the test fair and equitable across all of our classrooms? And are we having the policies in school A being enforced in school B? So once I find the answer out to those questions, I'll be sure to email everybody and let you know. But I think that's the $1 million question. And unfortunately, I don't know if I have the answer. So I'll stop right there.
All right. Well, thank you, Timothy. There's a lot of great conversation going on in the chat here. I want to kind of direct our attention there just for a few minutes. There's a lot of states that are weighing in on what they specifically are doing to address security issues because of the pandemic. So I think it's worth your time to read through some of those and just see everything from extending the testing window to, like we've talked about, policies, procedures, revamping, training, conducting desk audits, something new for a lot of states, and even asking districts to self monitor for a quality assurance visit rather than going out to conduct that on their own. So all interesting, all different. It seems like there's a lot of common themes, but there's also some differences with states. So please take a look at that. And also there's a question in here for those states on the call today that may be conducting a remote administration. There's a question in here for states who will be conducting remote administrations. How are you monitoring the remote sessions, and are you recording the remote test sessions? So if anybody has a response to that, please type that answer into the chat. We're interested in knowing your thoughts there.
Hey, Paul, can I ask a clarifying question on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
And when they say recording, are they visually recording the session? Is that what they're asking there? Or are they?
Yeah, that's the way I read that. It's my understanding that for some states that are doing remote testing, they would record much like I'm recording now, and it would be audio and video. And are you going as a state, if you're recording that, do you plan to go back and review any of those? Is there some sort of flagging mechanism that would flag aberrant behavior if it was detected? Is this a third party doing it? Is this your testing vendor that may be handling this for you? I think those are the questions.
Hey, Walt, you want me, in our remote testing for our interims, I can tell you we are not recording, but we do have the option that the teacher can monitor in real time it takes basically a snapshot, I think every 5 or 6 seconds, and they can interact with them that way and in chat, but we are not recording it in our platform, so we don't have that. I don't know what other states are, but that's what we're doing here in West Virginia for our interim assessments. I see Georgia commented in the chat. You want to read that?
Yeah, Georgia is not planning to hold any in-person monitoring, but they are doing something similar to Michigan. They're going to use desk audits at the state level and also require local districts to do desk audits of test admins and test security practices. So that's good. Delaware just weighed in there. You guys can read that in the chat as well. I think at this point, let me put these questions that I've been asking to our panelists up on the screen. And I want to hear from the audience in the chat. Put your question into us, because right now you've got 4 experts on the line, 3 that are deeply involved in test security, and Timothy, who's one of you guys in a state, the state education agency. So please ask your questions. I'm going to share my screen real quick.
Hey, Walt.
Yeah, go ahead.
While we're doing that, I've noticed there's a few topics, I'm getting a little noise on the feed, a few topics that haven't really been discussed that much that I'd like to just, throw out there and see what the attendees might say, or others on this fireside chat. For
Sure,
example,
go ahead.
one thing, I guess I did have another lesson learned from the previous question or two ago. One thing that we've seen happening a lot across states is their increase in the use of web monitoring for, I believe, both summative and interim assessments, and just having something done so they can see whether items, especially if it's secure materials, if it's been being shared out there in social media and others. But it seems like more and more states and assessment consortia are doing that. And the other thing, of course, is data forensics. Some states have been doing it for a while. Some are dipping their toes into it, but more states than ever seem to be moving down the road of saying, yeah, we need to do some sort of data forensics. So I just throw those out there as other things, other lessons learned from the past year.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. So here's a reminder of the questions that our panelists answered. If there's anything that you want more specificity on, put that in the chat, let us know, and we'll address it. Or if you have your own individual question as it relates to test security, please put that in the chat and we'll address that. And I'm gonna have to get out of the PowerPoint in order to look at the chat. So maybe you can see the time for questions now.
My chat disappeared for some reason. I think when the PowerPoint came up.
Well,
but I have a question for Timothy.
Okay.
Like other lessons learned or other things that West Virginia is doing, interested to hear what else. I know you haven't told us everything, and maybe you can't, but I'm sure you're doing some other things in response to looking at test security measures.
So as far as test security measures, so we do have some other things we're doing as far as we are running some data forensics, and I can expand if you're on the, we have found that a lot of cheating, a lot of irregularities going at the end of the class or the exam session or the session. And so we're having our vendor run data on sessions, because what we found is that in the past that if you have a group of 700 seventh graders in the school, if you have one examiner who is maybe doing some irregularities, that will be hidden in the group of 700 students. So we are running it by session ID, and what we found is that when we run our data by session ID, we find some irregularities, and we also find some irregularities in the end of testing where answer changes are changed wrong to right at the end very rapidly. So for example, a student may take an hour and a half on the test, may make 10 changes, and maybe 5 of them are right to wrong and wrong to right. And then at the end of the test, in maybe 3 minutes, they may change 6 answers and change them all to right. And so we looked, and this came from an investigation that we did at a school. And so after running that through our 2019 data, we discovered a couple investigations that we wanted to do, and we just kind of did them informally to see what happened. And we did find that's a good flagging mechanism. So that's we're really going to look hard at one of the matrices, because we're also looking at longitudinal data. We at the end of this assessment, just like all the other states, we'll look at percent proficient, improvements on those within the group, within the school, within the district. We'll look at student performance, if there's been 4 or 5 students that have increased performance. But I think that's going to be a real challenge this year, because we may see some unintended consequences of the pandemic when we look at our longitudinal data and the effects of the percent proficient in schools, and the fact that we may not have all of our students tested. The population may be different. We may have higher achieving students only test. We may have only lower achieving students test. So that's something that we're going to have to really look hard at as we look at our data forensics this summer. So it's going to be an interesting summer.
Yep. And data forensics is definitely important. And if states are not running data forensics, it may be too late for this spring with your contracts and vendors and whatnot. But if not, I mean, now would be a good time to put some of that in place, at least discussions with your vendor about what kind of data can you look at, what kind of data can you get, and what kind of statistics can you run. Timothy mentioned several of them, and similarity and wrong to right answer changes and timing statistics. And there's just a whole wealth of information that is present in the data, especially with computer-based testing. And I think that gets to my comment earlier in the presentation whenever I said, it's all about the data this year, more so than ever. And it's recognizing learning loss. It's recognizing true proficiency versus artificial inflated proficiency scores, and knowing if your data is trustworthy or not. So if you're not running data forensics, I think you definitely need to look at that and put that in place if your vendor does that. If not, there are other vendors out there that do data forensics, and I'm sure they would be glad to talk with you. Yes.
I do have a question for, I know I read through the chat. I did see some folks who are doing desk audits throughout the various states. I'd be curious to maybe hear from them as to either in chat or via voice, how they are, what information they're collecting in those desk audits, and are they just attendance logs, those types of things, or what's the procedure that they're using for those desk audits, if that's okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you would like to speak to that, feel free to chat back to Timothy, or if you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself and give a voice answer. While people are thinking, I would imagine, Timothy, they're going to be asking for training logs to make sure that test administrators and proctors are trained. Probably talking about maybe test security plans that would have been in place for spring testing, or maybe sign-in sheets, seating charts if they collect them during the actual test taking experience, the students' seating charts, maybe accommodations that are going to be offered. Just spitballing there, but those are things I would ask for if I were conducting a desk audit. Does any state want to weigh in on that?
Not to put anybody on a spot, but I was looking again at the chat. Jessica from from Michigan, and David from Massachusetts, who we've interacted with a lot over the years, both mentioned desk audits and what they're doing. So would love to hear from either or both of you. Are they able to unmute themselves, Walt, or do you have to do it?
I think they can do that, or they can maybe ask to unmute. I'm not sure. Let me find one of them.
Jessica did just respond in chat there.
Hi, this is David. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Go ahead, David.
Hi. So this is David Ragsdale in Massachusetts. And actually, Jessica and I just talked the other day about this because I was curious to get more information about how she was planning to do desk audits. So we've already had a conversation about this. In addition to some of the normal paperwork that we would collect, so we would want to see their internal tracking forms and their training confirmations and lists of the accommodations that they're providing. I think right now what we're thinking is to also reproduce some of what our own observation in-person checklist would ask. So having them answer questions that normally an observer would ask to them, where are the test materials? Are they stored in a secure central location? Is access limited? Do test administrators independently count materials before transferring them back to test coordinators? And in a sense, almost a self-attestation to certain requirements that are in the manual. So they're supposed to be doing them anyway, but really just making them kind of take responsibility for these elements of our testing protocols. How many people are in the room? Are the walls appropriately covered? And so forth.
I like those observations of David Ragsdale, just listening to them and thinking of things that I've done, going out to testing sites to observe and record what they're doing. There's another class of questions that you can do, which is, what would you do if a certain thing happens? And often that proves to be helpful in finding out whether they know the rules or not. Because often in places where we're dealing, not schools so much, dealing with trained administrators who supposedly are the ones that know all the rules, when we ask them what would we do if, they go look for their manual so they can look it up and answer the question. And that's good if they can find a manual. But a lot of things we hope that they know without looking in the manual. And I think it's good to check with people along those lines.
This is Jessica. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I've been having audio issues with my computer all week. So I know David mentioned that we had met earlier to kind of discuss this. We're doing the same thing. I listed the documents that are part of our desk audit that we're doing. We've actually created these as online forms with the exception of the testing schedule. The testing schedule, they can, we provide a template, but they can just upload the document into the system so that I can review it. But specific to our supports and accommodations, incident reporting, and then material and chain of custody, as well as testing staff and training, we basically took the questions from our in-person test administration observations and made those questions that they have to basically give their answers to as if we were actually interviewing them in person as part of our normal observation. So that's what we've done. I did try to make them short and sweet because at least in Michigan, it's not consistent well, Michigan, I guess, is moving forward with requesting another waiver so that we are not having to complete testing in the spring. So I think there's kind of some mixed feelings about moving forward with the assessments. So we wanted to try to create something that was relatively quick and easy for the schools to complete, but still meet our requirements and still complete monitoring. Now, we are going to also complete data forensic analyses, specifically wrong to right and response time this year. We can't do the other two analyses because it requires multiple years of data and we didn't test last year. But we are also, we do review our, offsite testing. We match supports and accommodations usage by student level information, including whether the students have an IEP or 504, over usage for all of our assessments. So we will continue with all of that data monitoring as well.
Hey, Jessica, that's a good idea with the online form for them to fill out, complete the questions. I like the idea. I think I'm going to steal that from you. You don't care.
No, not at all. I don't mind. I can actually share with you. Let me know next week if you want to take a look. I can set up a meeting and share with you the forms that we created.
All right. Thank you very much for that collaboration and explaining that to us all, Jessica. Thank you. Let me share my screen one more time here. I want to, all right, can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yep, okay. All right, so here's, and then the last couple of minutes here, what I want to do, as the Director of Education Services at Cavion, it's my goal to have these throughout 2021, these webinars. I feel like these are very informational. If I were a state assessment director still, I definitely would want to attend these and glean information from my colleagues, which we have seen happen today. And that's what these are for. I want them to be educational, informative, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel, right? Let's beg, borrow, and steal. I mean, not that, I mean, we're a test security company, so I can't say steal, but the point is there's a lot of great things that you states are doing, and why not share those with your other colleagues so they can have success during spring testing as well. So I will have future webinars that are coming up. And if you are interested in being a featured speaker, just like Timothy was for us today from West Virginia, please email me. My email address is on the screen here. I'm interested in talking to you, especially if you're interested in any of the topics that I have on the screen, because these are what my future webinars are going to be about. I'm going to talk about data forensics next, probably in February. I want to try to hit that before testing starts in the spring. And with that, I'm going to be looking at myths around data forensics, because there's a lot of misnomers about there, what you can do, what you can't do. And we'll take a deep dive into that. So if that's interesting to you, we definitely want to have states on here, or a variety of states. It would be great to have 2 or 3 states. That way you can share your experiences. Monitoring, if you're interested in on-site monitoring, investigations, web patrol, or automated item generation. And with that, using AIG to reduce the expense of item development cost. If that's something you are involved in and do and want to talk about, let me know in this through email. And I'm interested in talking with you so we can schedule something, more of these sessions. I hope you found this time valuable. I know I did. I learned a lot. I can tell that my colleagues have. And with that, we have 1 or 2 minutes left. Is there any other question anyone has? Let's put it in the chat. If not, I think this was very successful, and we're going to call it a wrap.
Well,
All right. Thank you all for attending.
if
John
we don't have
Olson?
a question in the chat, I have a news item to go with what you just shared.
Please go ahead.
We have a session that was accepted for the National Conference on Student Assessment, CCSSO's conference, of which I know many of the attendees go to. It focuses on test security. It focuses on what states are doing. It'll be a more in-depth dive on some of the things we just heard about and other states participating. So we'll share that information more widely too once we know when it's going to be and stuff. But anyway, we're happy to have a session accepted by CCSSO on test security activities of states.
All right. Thank you, John, for that plug there. And again, I'll be sharing the recording from today's webinar as well as the notes whenever I can get that available to me. So thank you all for attending, and hope you have a great day. And David Ragsdale says, any state people who would like to be added to the test security for state assessment listserv, please email him. That's key right there. I hope no one's left yet. I'll put that in an email to everybody, because David, again, he's running a listserv of state test security directors, state assessment directors, and they collaborate. So he's put his email address in the chat. So reach out to David if you're interested in getting on that listserv. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.